Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day so far. There have been a lot of people who have been booking in calls with me trying to understand how they can set up as an independent consultant or set up their own consultancy. And so the question remains, how can you transform your contracting approach into a high value strategic consulting business? What does that specifically look like within the UK? Because a lot of people talk about this within the US and all that kind of stuff there, but there isn't necessarily a clear model that people are necessarily talking about quite openly when it comes to the UK, at least anyway. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe as always. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Michael Tabirade. I'm an independent management consultant and founder of the consultancy, the Mastery Group. So in today's video and audio, if you're listening on a podcast, we're going to explore how to structure your consultancy with maximum credibility, engage with what is called economic buyers. I didn't come up with that. That was Alan Weiss. And build a brand that commands top tier fees. So let's get into it. Structuring your consultancy for credibility. What does this specifically mean? Well, really and truly, what this is really talking about is the fundamentals to setting up your business. Now, there isn't a specific way in terms of how you set up your business, but the reality is the more structure you have, the more you are respected or trusted within the industry. That's just what it looks like. And so we want to have as much structure as possible, but we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're not agile. That's what we don't want to do. So the bare bones of what you need to do is, number one, make sure you register with a limited company. Okay. Why limited company? Because there are tax advantages and it's the structure that makes sense when it comes to setting up as a consultancy, so to speak. You can use other structures, but I'm not an accountant, so you're going to have to speak to somebody else. The second thing is making sure that you secure the right level of insurance. So what do I mean by this? So this insurance could look like professional indemnity insurance. It could look like public liability insurance if you're dealing with the public or doing events and all that kind of stuff. And there's also employers liability insurance if you're taking on employers who are working and getting a salary from your organization as well. The other thing I want to talk about is making sure that you maintain the right level of compliance. So again, if you're going into management consulting, maybe it's a case where you have a certain type of accreditation. Okay, so this accreditation could be a consulting accreditation if it does exist, or something like managing successful programs if you're within the program space, or maybe it is something else. But one thing I do want to add to this is that, if you are taking on any sort of contracts outside of IR35 within your consultancy, so outside of IR35 is a type of tax where you're taxed based on your business setup, then it's important to make sure that you get IR35, I think it's called determination insurance. Okay, so there are some instances where some consultants have been, again, fined for not having the right level of tax set up because they were deemed as inside of IR35 as opposed to outside of IR35. If you don't know what that is, make sure you check out some of my previous videos which talk about that stuff in a bit more detail. So that is the sort of like key point, and the key takeaway here is the more structure you get, the better. The second thing I want to talk to is selling to the economic buyer. What does this specifically mean? Well, this whole idea of an economic buyer is something that I picked up from Alan Weiss. So he's essentially a consultant, an independent consultant within the US who has set up an elaborate sort of like career, and he calls the individuals or persons who you're selling to as the economic buyer. So this is not the person who is necessarily in HR, whatever it may be. This may be the CEO, this may be the director of programs or transformation. This is somebody who has their sort of like hands on the purse strings and can make the economic decision making. Okay, so you want to talk to those individuals there. Now, really and truly, where do you find these individuals? Well, number one, you can find these individuals in industry events. So it's really important to make sure that you go to the right sort of industry events where you can speak to these different types of people. Okay, so typically they're there trying to learn more about the markets or opportunities that are out there, etc., etc. In terms of where you find these industry events, you can speak to other colleagues, you can go to Eventbrite, you can, use Perplexity to search for some of this stuff. Whatever you utilize, make sure you're going to the right event where most people are at. So if there is an AI conference, what is the hottest AI conference in town? You want to go to those different places. And some of this is quite natural. It has to be quite organic by nature. You can't force this stuff necessarily unless you're doing like cold outreach, whether it's cold calling or cold emails. And that can work to a degree depending on what you're saying, okay? Now, I don't do any of that stuff, so I can't talk in that stuff, but you can check out channels online which do talk about that stuff in a bit more detail. If you do talk about that stuff, actually, and you've done it yourself, I'd love to know in the comments below, and I'd love to know what your results have been. The other sort of thing you could do is speak to recruiters. What do I mean by this? Recruiters have a big black book, okay? And so if you've been able to set yourself up in such a way where you have a great relationship with recruiters, then you're in a position where you can get quite a lot of information. And so with that in mind, I would speak to as many recruiters as possible to see who the main person is. Now you have to be kind of diplomatic because obviously you may be taking business away from them. They want you to go underneath their wing. But again, maybe there are people on their list that obviously is connected to them and you, or you could be connected to them, or whatever it may be. I said that very confusing, but it is what it is. So if you have something like Sales Navigator, okay, then you can go into Sales Navigator and you can do a bit more research. So that's another way of getting to these economic buyers. You can obviously categorize them based on your industry, a certain niche, and obviously a specific role and or potential pay bracket, and you can do it that way. If you don't have Sales Navigator, you can use sort of like the free version of LinkedIn Search. It isn't as good, but it's still pretty good for an advanced filtering search system. So you could utilize that and then you could message people that way. But of course, you can only message a certain amount of people a day who you're not connected with. So Sales Navigator may be a sensible option. I think it's like 60 odd or 70 odd pounds each month. So it's an investment, but if you're going to use it well. Another place is marketplaces. Okay, so marketplaces are one of the best places to find these economic buyers, or at least people who are in charge of the procurement cycle, which means that you have to go through a tendering process, a bidding process, and all that kind of stuff there. So you'd have to be on the lookout for some of this stuff, whether this is from a private sector, public sector, whatever it may be. So these are sort of the things that you should definitely bear in mind. Now, of course, when it comes to sort of like key positions and roles, think to yourself, commissioners, directors, commercial individuals, heads of departments, heads of portfolios and programs, budget holders, strategic individuals. These sorts of people are the right people you want to speak to. Of course, if you can speak to the CEO, that's great. But if not, don't worry about it. But HR isn't the right person to speak to. Again, I'm not knocking any HR people, any individuals like that. Just from how I've been able to secure my sort of like contracts independently, it hasn't been through HR. It's usually been some sort of director level individual. Okay, so think about that stuff. And of course, I'm looking at my notes as well. You have to think to yourself, there are two different types of buyer approaches. You've got the structured buyers approach and you've got the unstructured buyers approach. And I wish I had this on my slides, but it's all good. So essentially thinking about that, what does that specifically mean? The structured sort of approach is, again, those frameworks, portals, marketplaces that you jump on, which has a process. You have to apply, you have to answer certain questions, etc., etc. The unstructured approach is where you're shooting your shot, essentially. Okay, so again, if you are using social media as an example, that may be a way you do it. Another way could be through the networking events and stuff. But also, I've got a very good friend who has a brother who has done extremely well within this space. And what he's done is he's become an advisor for a VC invested sort of like organization that backs startups. And he's offered his services for free, offering them marketing advice. And because his information was so valuable, he's been able to live on that. I think he's been doing that for the last 6 or 7 months now. Okay, so he's left his 9 to 5 due to things that happened. But he's able to position himself where he's making double, I believe. Again, I don't want to say anything that's crazy or scandalous, but I know he's at least exceeding what he was making before on a monthly basis, just because he offered his services for free and he was in the right space and environment. So maybe you have to be in front of these types of individuals so you can get those opportunities as well. So think about that stuff also. I guess in addition to this, the next sort of like key takeaway is just making sure that you focus on individuals who have spending power and not just any random person. But anyway, quick question for you. Think about your current client acquisition strategy. This is, of course, if you're an independent consultant or contractor. Which area could benefit most from a direct economic buyer focused approach. What do I mean by that? If you are getting your contracts via an agency or a recruiter or whatever it may be, is there another way you could do this? Is there another way you could do this? And I want to spark this sort of like thought to some individuals. Recruiters won't be happy with me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And again, for those of you who are interested in getting some sort of coaching services from me in terms of career transitioning and developing your portfolio career, whether you're a senior leader, business leader, consultant, or contractor, then make sure to check out my form below. We can schedule a session, we can have a conversation, and let's see if we're a good fit to work together. Right, the next thing I want to talk about is building an elite consulting brand that attracts clients. What does this specifically mean? Well, essentially, I've broken it down into 3 different bits. So the first bit is really making sure that you have the right sort of funnel, okay? And this is talking about online stuff. So do you have a website that clearly articulates your brand, your message, you know, the things that you deliver in terms of services, case studies, testimonials, all of that kind of stuff there? Do you have surface packages? Are you ready? Okay, so packages could be not just sort of like consulting or contracting, could be advisory packages on a retainer basis. It could be a situation where people sort of book you in if they need help with program or project sort of support. It could be sort of like, again, courses or programs or workshops. There's a whole host of stuff that you can do. But are you offering stuff that makes sense in terms of product market fit for your specific community or audience or whatever it may be? So remember all of this stuff there. You also want to make sure that you position yourself in such a way where you are seen as an authority within your space. I do feel like it does help and give a bit of an edge if you have some sort of personal brand online. It just does. It's an unspoken edge, okay? Especially if you're in a space that is within the public sector or private sector and you're doing what's called conservative consulting, okay, as an independent. Then when people see your profile and stuff, people are going to be looking at you a certain way and saying, okay, I'd love to know more about what he does there. And they're doing this. Okay, interesting stuff. So bear all of this stuff in mind. So you want to make sure you optimize your sort of like online brand for the right kind of stuff. Of course, when it comes to things like LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff there, you can provide sort of like insights when it comes to your daily posting, so micro posts, or it could be videos. So obviously I'm using YouTube, this is the way I do it, but we're talking about LinkedIn here. You could develop a newsletter or articles. There are all of these different stuff that you could use. Now, do you have to use LinkedIn? No. But again, that's where a lot of the economic buyers will be. But you have to think to yourself, think less about, I guess the platform's important, don't get me wrong, but think more about the individual. That's the most important thing, as opposed to the organization. Where is the individual going to be? Okay, so think about all of this stuff. So hopefully all of this makes sense. And of course, it would not be me if I didn't have, quote unquote, a bit of a bonus. Okay, it's not really a bonus, but you know, I like to keep things on edge. So create a reoccurring revenue consulting model. What does this specifically mean? Now, I think for a lot of you, you're probably thinking about either getting into contracting or leveling up within your consulting and contracting space, or you're looking to do something that is specific to, let's say, the coaching, mentoring, and advisory sort of like space. So maybe there is an opportunity where with all of the stuff that you're offering and producing in terms of a high value brand, you are giving people the opportunity to sit down with you and have coaching sessions. Okay, maybe that is a situation that you set up. Maybe you're doing this specifically for leaders, or maybe you're doing this for job seekers, as an example. Maybe you are setting up some sort of like group coaching program where you're giving people the opportunity to, again, answer questions and all this kind of stuff there. I know for me, I set up my course, The Independent Consultant, so individuals looking to get into contracting, because a lot of people ask me questions. This was probably like 4 or 5 years ago now, I don't even remember, but you can check it out if you're interested. But the point being made is, yes, it does make me income, so to speak, but it's more so based on the fact that it was an easier way to address questions that were being asked again and again and again and again. So you have to think to yourself, how can you package things in a more digital savvy way or in a more scalable way where it doesn't necessarily require a bespoke service. I believe in bespoke. I think that's important. But in the same vein, it's important for you to make sure that you set yourself up in the right way, shape, and form. Cool. So again, to summarize, register your business, make sure it's a limited company, get the right sort of insurance. You can use something called Kingsbridge. Check out the link below. I think I've got a link on that. So, just make sure. And make sure that you have the right sort of like protections when it comes to IR35 determination, etc., etc. There may be situations where you may need to get what's the word called, intellectual property stuff set up. So it's called the IPO. You may want to sort of like get your stuff trademarked if you have proprietary information and or designs, etc., etc. You want to target decision makers. So this is at events. This is obviously online, whether you're doing this cold or warm, or this is via some sort of marketplace like a procurement portal, whatever it may be. You want to build authority in the right places, so have the right website, brands, colors, information, all of that kind of just there. Have clear service packages, make sure it's logical, test it with different individuals and build up from there. But you also want to productize your services so you can develop retainers and or a revenue model as well. So hopefully this makes sense in terms of how you set it up. So just before I continue, again, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. I'm also on TikTok, but again, I need to do a bit more on there, I have to admit. But again, if you want a competitive edge within the business or market space, then make sure to check out the link below and we can have a conversation. Now, of course, what I do want to say is consultancy setup within the UK, again, doesn't have any type of regulation or any type of specific approach. But again, the more structure you have and the more trust that you have from your end clients or your potential clients, the more opportunity arises. Okay, you don't have to do all of this stuff. The beginning part I think is important to do, but you do need to make sure that you're set up properly. What I didn't include in this, which is silly of me, is talking about an accountant. Okay, I think an accountant is going to be crucial for you to have in order for you to understand how you can position yourself and how you can sort of like manage your money, be more tax efficient, all that kind of stuff there. There's also things centered around setting up the right level of systems, templates, all of that kind of jazz. But the point being made is this stuff, at least that I've highlighted, will give you a high level blueprint in terms of what this looks like specifically for you. If you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, independent consulting, and all of the above, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.